She's choking, someone do something. The words tore out of Aria Vasquez before she could stop them, raw and desperate, cutting through the soft murmur of conversation like a blade through silk. She was 28 years old but looked 40, her dark hair pulled back so tight her scalp ached, her borrowed black server uniform hanging loose on shoulders that had learned to carry too much weight. The private dining room of Marcelo's restaurant glowed in candlelight, and the smell of garlic and roasted tomatoes hung thick in the air, mixing with expensive perfume and the ozone-sharp scent of the summer thunderstorm building outside. The little girl at the corner table had her hand pressed to her throat. Her face was turning purple. Not a soft purple. A desperate, oxygen-starved purple that meant she had maybe 90 seconds before her brain would start dying. Her parents sat frozen, forks suspended in midair. The waitstaff, 5 of them, trained, professional, paid to handle emergencies, stood absolutely still, their eyes moving from the child to each other to the man sitting across from her, like statues waiting for permission to move. The man was Vincent Marino. Aria knew his name because the restaurant manager had whispered it when she arrived for her shift at 7 o'clock that evening. She knew what it meant because she had lived in North Philadelphia her entire life, had heard his name the way other people heard about hurricanes or earthquakes, something powerful enough to reshape the landscape, something you learn to navigate around. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 55, with salt and pepper hair swept back from his forehead and a scar that ran along his jawline like a map of some violence that had happened long ago. His suit was charcoal, the fabric so fine it seemed to absorb light, and it cost more than Aria made in 6 months. Everything about him radiated the kind of controlled power that came from never having to raise his voice. Lightning flashed outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. The thunder followed 3 seconds later. Aria dropped the tray she was carrying. The glass shattered across the marble floor, a sound like ice cracking, like 1,000 small breaking things happening at once. But she was already moving, crossing the room in 4 steps, her shoes slipping slightly on the wet tile. She didn't think. Her daughter Ava was 7 years old and had a heart defect that would kill her in 5 days without a surgery she couldn't afford, and that fact had burned away everything in Aria except the will to keep children alive. She wrapped her arms around the little girl from behind, positioning her hands just below the ribcage the way she had learned from a YouTube video watched on a cracked phone screen at 3 in the morning. 1 thrust upward. The girl's body convulsed. Nothing came out. 2 thrusts. The air left Aria's own lungs with the effort. She could feel the child's ribs under her palms, feel how small this human was, feel the panic thrashing through tiny muscles. 3rd thrust. A piece of bread shot from the girl's mouth and skittered across the polished floor. The child gasped, a sound like a door opening after years of being sealed shut. She coughed, and coughed again, and then she was crying, her small face wet, her body shaking with the sudden return of oxygen and the terror of almost dying. The room exploded into motion. Servers rushed forward. The father, a man with a diamond-heavy watch and tears streaming down his face, pulled his daughter away from Aria and held her, rocking her, whispering her name over and over like a prayer. The mother wrapped herself around both of them. The grandmother crossed herself. Someone was calling 911, although the child was breathing now, was conscious, was going to be fine. Vincent Marino stood up. He was taller standing than he had seemed sitting, his presence expanding to fill the space like a dark cloud filling a room. He looked at Aria for 1 long second, and his eyes, dark as a moonless night, eyes that had ordered deaths and orchestrated suffering without flinching, softened. Just for a fraction of a second. But Aria saw it. The way a person sees lightning flash across their peripheral vision, the way they see something true and terrible and beautiful all at once. "Your name," he said. His voice was low, solid like an oath, like something that could not be taken back. "Aria," she said. Her own voice was trembling, fragile as a candle in the wind. "Aria Vasquez." He studied her face, his dark eyes moving across her features like he was memorizing something precious. He looked at her chapped lips, her hollow cheeks, the calluses on her hands from 3 jobs that paid barely enough to survive. He looked at her the way an archaeologist looks at something buried and forgotten, and then he nodded, once, slow and deliberate. The restaurant manager appeared at Aria's shoulder, a man named Robert who had hired her for this single shift because his usual catering staff had called in sick. "Thank you," he said to her, his hand on her elbow. "Thank you, that was incredible. Come on, let's get you back to the kitchen to change, you're soaked through." Vincent did not move. He just watched as Robert pulled her away, his dark eyes never leaving her face until she disappeared through the swinging kitchen doors and the candlelit room was between them again. In the kitchen, the head chef was already yelling about the broken glass, about staying focused, about how important this client was, about how Vincent Moreno had reserved the entire private room for his family dinner and nothing could go wrong. Aria changed into the spare uniform Robert kept in his office, hanging her damp clothes on a hook, trying to stop her hands from shaking. She did not know that Vincent Moreno was in the private dining room, asking Robert to describe her. She did not know that he was making a phone call to a man named Marco, his oldest lieutenant, the man who had been with him for 15 years, and that he was saying something that Marco had never heard him say before: "I need to know everything about the woman who saved my daughter's life." She did not know that at that exact moment, as she was folding her wet uniform into a plastic bag, her daughter Ava was lying on a cot in the basement of Mercy House, a shelter run by a woman named Sophie Langford, running a fever that climbed higher every night, her small heart struggling to pump blood through chambers that were shaped wrong, shaped broken, shaped like a death sentence in slow motion. She did not know that she had 90 minutes before her world would change. The storm outside was reaching its peak. Wind tore at the windows of Marcello's, making the glass rattle. Rain came down in sheets, the kind of rain that floods streets, that turns sidewalks into rivers, that makes the city feel like it is drowning. Inside, the patrons finished their meals. Vincent sat at the head of the table, his arm around his daughter, who was still coughing occasionally but was alive, was breathing, was going to grow up because a woman with $2 in her pocket and a borrowed uniform had not hesitated. When Aria's shift ended at 10 o'clock, Robert paid her in cash, $40 that she folded carefully and placed in her wallet next to 2 crumpled dollar bills that she had been saving for gas. $42. It was more than she had made in 3 days. She took the bus back through the rain, watching the city slide past the rain-streaked windows, watching North Philadelphia reveal itself in flashes of neon and broken streetlights. The shelter was a converted warehouse on the edge of Kensington, painted beige, with bars on the windows and a sign that read Mercy House in faded letters. Sophie Langford had inherited money from a dead husband and opened this shelter 10 years ago, and people called her charitable, called her an angel, said she was saving women and children. But Aria knew the truth. She had lived here for 4 months, and she had learned that Sophie's charity came with conditions, with judgment, with the constant weight of being watched and found insufficient. She found Ava asleep in the dormitory room they shared with 6 other women and their children. Her daughter was curled on her side, dark hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, breathing shallow, her small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that seemed precarious. Aria touched her forehead. Fever, still climbing. The surgery was scheduled for 5 days from now, and they needed $200,000, and Aria had $42. She lay down beside her daughter in the darkness and did not sleep. At 10:38 that night, a black SUV pulled up in front of the shelter. Then another. Then another. 5 vehicles total, their engines running, their headlights cutting through the rain. 15 men in dark suits emerged, moving with the synchronized precision of a military unit. They did not look like they were there to harm anyone. They looked like they were there to deliver a message. The night manager, a woman named Teresa, stood up when they entered, her face going pale. "Which dormitory is Aria Vasquez in?" the first man asked. His name was Marco, and he had been with Vincent Moreno for 15 years. He was 49 years old and had seen things that would have broken normal men. He had also, 5 minutes earlier, witnessed his boss show emotion in a way he had never shown before, and he was beginning to understand that something fundamental had shifted in the world. Teresa pointed. The men moved upstairs with the quiet efficiency of ghosts. Marco stood in the doorway of the dormitory room and looked at Aria, who had bolted upright, her body moving in front of Ava's instinctively, her eyes wild with fear. She thought they had come for her. She thought someone had called the authorities about her living situation, about her unemployed status, about her fitness as a mother. She thought they had come to take Ava away. "You are not in any danger," Marco said, and his voice was like distant thunder, like something inevitable. "Aria Vasquez. The boss wants you to know something. He does not forget debts. You saved his daughter's life tonight. He is a man who repays his debts." Marco paused, and in that pause was the weight of 15 years of loyalty, of witness, of seeing power used in ways both terrible and merciful. "You will not be bothered again. No one will touch you. No one will threaten you. We will know if they do. And they will answer to us." The men left as quietly as they had come. Their engines rumbled to life. Their headlights swept across the window. And then they were gone, leaving only the sound of rain and the echo of Marco's words. Aria sat in the darkness, her arms around Ava, and she tried to understand what had just happened. She did not know that Vincent Marino had made 3 phone calls in the 15 minutes between the time she left Marcello's and the time Marco arrived at the shelter. She did not know that he had asked Marco to find out everything about her real name, her situation, her daughter's name, her daughter's condition. She did not know that when Marco had reported back, saying that a child named Ava had a congenital heart defect that required surgery in 5 days and cost $200,000, Vincent had gone very still and had said nothing, and had picked up the phone again. What she did know was that something had changed. The universe had tilted. And in 5 days, her daughter would have the surgery she needed, or Aria's heart would break in a way that no amount of money could ever repair. Sometimes the people who seem invisible carry the greatest light. The rain fell in sheets against the windshield of the 2003 Honda Civic, and inside that car, in the back seat, a small girl named Ava lay curled beneath 2 thin blankets, her forehead burning with a fever that had climbed to 101.3 degrees. Her mother, Aria Vasquez, sat in the front seat with her hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at nothing, listening to her daughter's shallow breathing and the rhythm of the rain. Outside, the world was dark. The closed Suds and Shine laundromat loomed behind them like a monument to invisibility. This was where they slept. This was home. Aria reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out 2 crumpled dollar bills. She held them in her palm as if they were made of glass. $2. That was what remained after yesterday's purchase of children's Tylenol, after a week of rationing every cent, after 6 months of watching the bills pile up and multiply like a curse that could not be erased. $2 stood between her and absolute nothing. She turned to look at her daughter. Ava's hair, dark like her father's, was matted with sweat against her neck. Her breathing came shallow and quick. In 5 days, if nothing changed, this little girl would go into surgery at Children's Hospital. A congenital heart defect. Mitral valve replacement. Dr. Patterson had been kind enough to schedule it, had looked at Aria with something close to pity and said the words that had shattered her, $200,000. That was the price of keeping her daughter alive. $200,000 that lived in a world Aria would never reach. She checked the time on the dashboard clock, 5:11 in the morning. She had 20 minutes before she needed to get Ava up for school, before she needed to pretend everything was normal, before she needed to become the invisible woman again. She opened the car door as quietly as she could and stepped out into the rain. The Gas and Go station sat 2 blocks away, its fluorescent lights harsh against the darkness. Aria walked there with her shoulders hunched, her shoe soaked through before she made it halfway. Inside, the bathroom smelled like bleach and broken dreams. She washed her face with paper towels and hand soap, watching the tired stranger in the mirror. 28 years old but looking like someone who had lived through decades of war. Her eyes were hollow. Her cheekbones sharp as blades. The woman staring back was not the woman Diego had married 7 years ago, not the woman who had laughed, who had believed in things like safety and forever. She pulled her hair into a tight bun, changed out of yesterday's shirt into a clean one pulled from her backpack, and stood for a moment just breathing. Then she walked back to the car. Ava was awake when she returned. The little girl sat up, rubbing her eyes, her stuffed rabbit, a grey thing with one ear torn, clutched against her chest. The rabbit had belonged to Aria once, when she was small, when her own mother was alive, when the world felt less like a knife waiting to cut. "Mama, I'm hot," Ava whispered, her voice thin and small. Aria sat beside her and brushed her daughter's hair with a comb she kept in her backpack. It was the same comb she used on herself, the same comb that had belonged to her mother before that. Small rituals, these were all she had left. Small rituals and the stubborn refusal to let her daughter know how afraid she was. "I know, baby. We'll get you cooled down. Can you drink some water?" Aria pulled a bottle from the backpack, half full, and held it to Ava's lips. The girl drank slowly, then lay back down. Aria pulled out a thin folder she kept beneath the driver's seat. Inside were documents, medical bills, hospital statements, a letter from Dr. Patterson confirming the surgery date. And underneath all of that, a photograph in a worn plastic sleeve. Diego Vasquez in his army uniform, taken 3 days before he deployed to Afghanistan. He had been smiling in the photo, that confident smile that had made her fall in love with him when they were both 19 years old in high school. That photograph was the only thing she owned that was not a necessity. Everything else could fit into her backpack: 2 changes of clothes, socks with holes in them, a toothbrush, a bar of soap, Ava's birth certificate, her own driver's license, and the photograph. The job sustained her, barely. The midnight cleaning shift at the First Bank Tower, where she scrubbed toilets and emptied trash cans in the sterile offices of people who made in 1 hour what she made in a month. The security guards pretended not to see her. She was invisible, which meant she was safe. At Eddie's diner during lunch, she washed dishes until her hands cracked and bled, until her fingers went numb in the hot water. The cook, a man named Derek with a rough voice and a kind heart, sometimes let her take home half a sandwich if she worked fast. The sandwich fed Ava for a day. And on weekends, she worked at St. Catherine's shelter, doing laundry for the other homeless people, for the women and children with nowhere else to go. That was where she and Ava slept when there was space available. That was where Sophie Langford ruled like a queen ruling over peasants. 3 weeks ago, Marcus Webb had appeared at the shelter. He was a man in his middle 40s, the kind of man who wore gold rings on every finger and kept his hair slicked back with something that smelled like chemicals and desperation. He owned half the rental properties in the neighborhood, including the apartment she and Ava had lived in until he decided otherwise. He found her in the laundry room, surrounded by the industrial rumble of washing machines, and he smiled at her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Aria," he said, his voice smooth like poison. "I've been looking for you." She turned away, pretending to fold sheets she had already folded. "I have a proposition," he continued, stepping closer until she could smell the cigarettes and mint on his breath. "Your rent is what, $4,800 in arrears." "I know what I owe," she said quietly. "I could forgive it. All of it. I could forgive it if you did something for me. A small thing, really. You're a beautiful woman, Aria. Surely you understand what I'm asking." The words hung in the air between them like a threat, like a blade wrapped in ice. She understood exactly what he was asking. "No," she said. She did not turn around. She did not look at him. She just kept her hands moving, kept folding, kept pretending he was not there. Marcus Webb's smile faded. She heard it in his voice when he spoke again, quiet and cold. "You're going to regret this." 3 days later, her eviction notice was posted on her apartment door. Within a week, she and Ava were on the street. The shelter had taken them in, and for a few months, Aria had thought maybe she was going to survive this. Maybe Ava would grow up. Maybe they would find a way. Then Sophie Langford had pulled her aside yesterday morning, her designer purse slung over one arm, her jewelry glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Aria, we need to talk about some concerns I've been hearing," Sophie had said, her voice dripping with false concern. She was a woman in her 50s who had never wanted for anything, who lived in a townhouse in Center City and drove a car that cost more than Aria would make in 10 years. "Several residents have mentioned that you've been taking things. Donations, mostly. Food items, supplies meant for everyone." "I haven't taken anything," Aria had said, her voice steady even as her heart began to race. "They also say you seem unstable. Erratic. A woman in your situation, caring for a sick child." Sophie had let the implication hang. "I'm not sure you're fit to be here anymore. I'm not sure you're fit to be caring for that little girl." Aria's hands had clenched into fists. "My daughter is not sick. She's just—" "I'm going to need you to leave by the end of the week," Sophie had interrupted, examining her manicured nails as if Aria's life was not collapsing in front of her. "We simply cannot have that element here. Do you understand? That element." As if Aria was a stain. As if her poverty was contagious. Now, sitting in her car with her daughter burning with fever, with $2 in her pocket, with 5 days until the surgery that would never happen, Aria heard her phone buzz. She pulled it from her backpack, a cheap device she kept for emergencies, and saw a text from a number she did not recognize. The message said only, "One-night catering job available. Marcelo's Restaurant, Center City. For hours, $80 cash. Tonight, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Interested? $80. That would be enough for another week of gas, another few meals, another handful of days keeping them alive." She typed back, "Yes." The response came immediately, 6 p.m. Marcelo's on Walnut Street. Ask for Tony at the back entrance. Bring nothing but yourself. Aria looked at her daughter. Ava's fever had climbed higher. The child slept fitfully, caught between dreams and pain. Aria would have to leave her alone in the car for 4 hours. She would have to trust that nothing would happen, that no one would find her, that the world would let her daughter sleep undisturbed while her mother bussed tables for people who would not even look at her. She tucked the blankets tighter around Ava, kissed her forehead, and whispered a prayer to a God she was not sure was listening anymore. The rain continued to fall. The 2003 Honda Civic sat in the darkness behind the closed laundromat. And inside that car, a little girl fought a fever while her mother counted the hours until she would have to abandon her, just for a while, just long enough to survive one more day. The summer rain hammered against the windows of Marcelo's restaurant like 1,000 urgent fists, and at 8:06 in the evening, Aria Vasquez moved through the private dining room carrying a tray of water glasses, trying to be the kind of invisible that meant nothing would be asked of her, nothing would be demanded, nothing would shatter the careful balance of survival she'd constructed with $2 and prayer. The room smelled like roasted garlic and old money, like cream sauce simmering in wine, like the world that existed on the other side of glass she would never quite reach. Heavy wooden tables gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers that cast shadows like dancing ghosts across oil paintings of the Italian countryside, and in the corner booth, the man everyone whispered about sat with a little girl in a pink dress, her dark curls framing a face so much like Ava's that Aria's chest tightened as if something inside her had clenched its fist. The girl was maybe 6 years old. She was laughing, pointing at pasta on her father's plate, and there was something about the man's expression when he looked at her that told Aria he would burn cities to keep that laugh alive. 2 men in tailored suits sat across from them, broad-shouldered and still, their eyes tracking the room with the intensity of soldiers. Aria had heard their names whispered by the kitchen staff, Vinny and Nino, and she'd learned in her 24 hours of desperate survival to recognize the kind of men who could end someone's life the way other people ended conversations. She was clearing a table 3 feet away when it happened. The little girl reached for her water glass. In one moment her hand was steady. In the next, her face shifted. Pink cheeks flushed red. Her hand flew to her throat. A piece of bread, swallowed too quickly, had wedged itself in her airway. The man, Vincent Marino, was holding her in seconds, his massive frame suddenly helpless, his hands trembling as he patted her back, his face breaking open like something sacred being shattered. She could not breathe. The whole room understood this in the space of a heartbeat. She was turning purple, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water, her eyes wide and absolute with terror. Silence swallowed the room like a predator. The waitstaff froze. Someone gasped. Vinny and Nino moved toward their boss but stopped, unsure, as if they'd never seen their world tilt off its axis before. Aria's tray fell from her hands. glass exploded against the marble floor, the sound like a gunshot in the silence, water and light scattered everywhere, and without thinking, without calculating the cost of being noticed, without weighing the danger of stepping into a world that didn't belong to her, she moved. 5 steps. Her worn shoes carried her across the distance like her body had decided something her mind was still negotiating. She wrapped her arms around the child from behind, locked her hands below the small ribcage, and pulled up and in. Hard. The girl's body convulsed. Once. Nothing. Twice. Nothing. Third time, a piece of bread flew out and struck the white tablecloth like evidence of a death that almost happened. The girl gasped. Coughed. Pulled air into her lungs with the sound of survival itself. She started crying, great heaving sobs that were somehow the most beautiful noise Aria had ever heard, because crying meant breathing, meant living, meant the world had not ended in this private room with oil paintings watching. Vincent pulled his daughter close, his face buried in her dark curls, his massive shoulders shaking. When he looked up, his eyes found Aria's and held them like they'd been searching for something and just found it. For a moment, this man who controlled empires was just a father, and tears glistened at the corners of his dark eyes before he blinked them away, recalibrating, pulling himself back into whatever shape a man like him had to hold. What's your name? His voice was rough, like gravel and rainfall. It carried the weight of every dangerous thing the whispered stories had promised. Aria, she said. Aria Vasquez. He nodded once, slow and deliberate. You have children. She hesitated. The truth felt dangerous. A daughter. 7 years old. His gaze moved across her then, across the uniform that didn't fit right, the shoes held together with more than stitching, the way her hands trembled slightly now that the adrenaline was wearing off and she understood what she'd just done, stepped forward when everyone else had retreated, made herself visible in a room full of powerful men. He saw something in her. She watched it happen across his face like a door opening to a room he'd thought was sealed forever. Before he could say anything more, the restaurant manager materialized beside her, his face flushed with something that looked like anger and fear combined. Aria, we need you back in the kitchen. Now. He was pulling her away with his hand on her elbow, forcing her back into invisibility. Thank you for your quick thinking. That was very brave. But you've disturbed our VIP guests. Please return to your duties. When her shift ended at 10:44 in the evening, the manager handed her $80 in cash, his mouth a thin line. Don't come back, he said quietly. You caused a scene. Broke dishes. Disturbed the evening. I cannot have that element working in my restaurant. That element. Aria took the money without argument, walked out into the summer thunderstorm that had finally broken open, rain soaking through her thin jacket, her hair plastered to her face, the $80 clutched against her chest like it was enough to rebuild the world. At 11:13 in the evening, she pushed open the door of her 2003 Honda Civic parked behind the closed laundromat, and the air inside hit her like a wall of fever heat. Ava's small body was drenched in sweat, her face flushed deep red, her breathing shallow and rapid. The digital thermometer Aria had bought 3 days ago for $2 at the dollar store read 102.1 degrees. Aria's hands moved on memory, muscle memory, the practiced movements of a mother who had been terrified so many times it had become her native language. She used the last of the children's Tylenol from the bottle under the front seat, cradled her daughter's burning body against her own, whispered promises into the dark that she wasn't sure she could keep. It's okay, baby. It's okay. Mommy's here. Mommy's going to fix this. But her voice shook. The promises scattered like dust. At 11:19 in the evening, headlights flooded the parking lot like a sudden sunrise that didn't belong to the night. Not one car. 5 black SUVs, pulling in with the precision of a military operation, their tires silent on the wet asphalt. Aria's heart stopped. She'd been waiting for Marcus Webb's men, for the landlord's retaliation for refusing him, for the cost of saying no to someone with power and nothing to lose. 15 men stepped out into the rain. They wore dark suits that probably cost more than everything she owned. They moved with practiced synchronization, like a single organism fractured into pieces, and Aria locked the car doors with shaking hands, pulled Ava close, felt her daughter's fever-hot skin against her own. This is how it ends, some part of her thought. This is what happens when you're nobody and you try to be somebody. They erase you. The lead man approached the driver's window, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone. He knocked gently on the glass. Aria's breath stopped. She cracked the window 1 inch. Cold rain dripped through onto her leg. Aria Vasquez. His voice was surprisingly soft, like silk with steel underneath. We're not here to hurt you. Mr. Marino sent us. He wants to speak with you. I don't know any Mr. Marino, Aria whispered. The man whose daughter you saved 2 hours ago, the man said. His name was Vinny, though she didn't know it yet. He doesn't forget debts. Please. It's important. Aria looked at Ava sleeping against her, her small body burning. She looked at the $82 in her pocket, the $80 from the restaurant plus her original $2, the only currency standing between her daughter and the absolute end of everything. If I go with you, Aria said, her voice like breaking glass, my daughter comes too. Of course, Vinny said. And something in the simple acceptance of that condition told her these men operated by a code she'd never been part of, a world where debts and children and loyalty meant something tangible. The ride through Philadelphia was a blur of rain and night, the city streets slick and gleaming like something drowned. They drove her to a warehouse in South Philadelphia, industrial area, the kind of place where nobody heard anything. The rain hammered the metal roof in waves, and when she stepped inside, still holding sleeping Ava, the temperature dropped like they'd crossed into another country entirely. The office space in the back was nothing like she'd expected. Clean. Organized. Leather furniture that probably cost more than her rent. The smell of coffee and old wood, the kind of space where serious men made serious decisions. Vincent Marino stood when she entered, and up close he was older than she'd thought, maybe 40, maybe older, lines carved into his face like someone had written a story there in hurt and responsibility. His dark eyes were exhausted. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides like he was holding something back. You saved my daughter's life, he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath. I owe you a debt. What do you need? Aria holding Ava against her chest, her walls up like barbed wire. I don't need anything from you. Vincent studied her the way an architect studies a building, seeing through to the foundation. You're living in your car. You work 3 jobs. Your daughter is sick. How did he know? Some part of her didn't want to know the answer. His voice gentler, what does she need? And something broke open inside Aria then. The wall. The careful construction of survival. The years of holding it together collapsing like a structure built on sand. Heart surgery, she said, and her voice shattered. Mitral valve replacement. $200,000. 5 days. I've tried, I've applied for grants, charities, payment plans. I've sold everything I own. I've worked until I couldn't stand anymore. And it's not enough. It will never be enough. And in 5 days, she's going to need a surgery I can't pay for, and she's going to die, and I'm going to let her die because I'm nobody and nobodies don't get to save their children. She was crying now, holding Ava so tightly she worried she might hurt her, but she couldn't let go, couldn't stop holding on. Vincent sat down heavily in one of the leather chairs, and for a moment he looked older than old, looked like someone who'd been carrying weight longer than seemed humanly possible. I lost a daughter once, he said quietly. 10 years ago. Stillborn. I have a nursery in my house I've never taken apart. A name I never say out loud. There's a crib, a mobile, pink bedding that's never been slept in. Aria looked at him, at this dangerous man, at the raw wound she could see opened inside him. Sophia, the daughter you saved, she's my second chance. You gave her back to me. And now I'm going to give your daughter back to you. He pulled out his phone. Made a call to Dr. Patterson at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. His voice when he spoke was different, commanding, certain, the kind of voice that made things happen in the world. The surgery for Aria Vasquez is covered. Every cent. Do it tomorrow. I'll send you the details. He hung up before Dr. Patterson could ask questions. It's done. Aria couldn't breathe. Couldn't process the magnitude of what had just shifted in the world. I can't accept this. I don't even know you. Why would you? It's not a gift, Vincent said. His expression hardened then, something dangerous moving underneath. It's a debt paid. But there's something else you need to know. St. Catherine's shelter where you're staying. Sophie Langford owns it. Aria's blood went cold. She's business partners with Marcus Webb. They run a scheme together, targeting desperate women, threatening them, exploiting them. When the women refuse, Sophie starts the paperwork. Files reports with child services saying they're neglectful, unstable, unfit. By the time she's finished, the women disappear, and nobody questions it because she's already made sure nobody believes them. The rain continued hammering the warehouse roof, and Aria understood that the world she'd been trying to survive in had teeth, had architecture, had enemies designed specifically to destroy people like her. Vincent's voice was quiet. You and Ava will stay somewhere safe until after the surgery. My men will protect you. But Aria, stubborn and broken and desperate not to lose herself entirely, I don't want protection. I want to handle this myself. Vincent nodded slowly, with something that looked like respect. Then let me give you the tools. What changed everything happened at that same moment across the city, in Sophie Langford's upscale townhouse in Rittenhouse Square, where she sat with Marcus Webb drinking wine that cost more than Aria made in a month. Sophie's voice was cold as carved ice. The Vasquez woman. I'll file a report with child services tomorrow. Neglect, instability, unsuitable living conditions. By the time I'm finished, they'll take her daughter away. Marcus smiled, and it was the smile of someone who understood that certain people in the world were disposable. Outside, the rain fell on Philadelphia like a curse that wouldn't lift. The fluorescent lights of Children's Hospital burned white and terrible above Ava's sleeping face. Her small chest rose and fell with the steady rhythm of healing, the heart monitor beside her bed beeping in a pattern that meant survival, meant a second chance, meant everything Aria had fought for in those months of sleeping in a car with $2 in her pocket and hope that refused to die. The line ran clear fluid into her daughter's arm. The surgical bandage on her chest was clean, white, pristine. For the first time in 4 months, Aria could breathe without her lungs collapsing. She sat in the plastic chair beside the bed, her hand resting on the rail, afraid to touch Ava even though the surgery was complete, as if her exhaustion and desperation might somehow contaminate her daughter's recovery. Through the 7th-floor window, Philadelphia sprawled gray and wet below them, the November rain from the night before still pooling on the parking lot asphalt, puddles reflecting the clouds that hung heavy as stones. Aria's phone sat dark on her lap. Vincent's men were stationed downstairs. Everything was safe. Everything was finally, impossibly safe. Then at 9:23 in the morning, the door opened. 2 people in navy blazers entered first, a man and a woman, both carrying folders, both moving with the careful professionalism of people trained to deliver devastating news. Behind them came Marcus Webb, her landlord, his polyester shirt straining across his bloated stomach, his smile the smile of a man who had learned to enjoy other people's suffering. And beside him, in a cream-colored suit that cost more than Aria had earned in 6 months, walked Sophie Langford. Sophie was exactly what Aria had learned to hate about the world. 62 years old but preserved by money into looking 50, her hair a frosted blonde sculpture, her face pulled tight by cosmetic procedures that had erased any trace of genuine expression. She carried a folder embossed with the seal of the Department of Child Protective Services. Her perfume entered the room before she did, something floral and expensive, designed to mask the smell of cruelty. The female CPS worker, whose name was Jennifer Patterson, stepped forward. Her voice was apologetic but firm, the voice of someone reading from a script she had read 100 times. Ms. Vasquez? We've received multiple reports that you may be an unfit mother. Living in your vehicle, no stable housing, no documented income source, exposing your daughter to dangerous and unstable conditions. We need to take your daughter into temporary protective custody pending a full investigation." Aria stood. The movement felt like standing against a hurricane. "You can't. She just came out of surgery. She needs me. She needs to be safe," Sophie interrupted, her voice carrying the kind of certainty that only comes from never having been wrong in your own mind. "Which is exactly why we're here." Marcus stepped forward, close enough that Aria could smell the coffee and cigarettes on his breath. His smile widened. "Should have taken my offer when you had the chance, girl. Should have been grateful I was offering you a way out. But you got pride, and pride doesn't keep a roof over anybody's head, does it?" The male CPS worker, older, with tired eyes that had seen too much, moved toward Ava's bed with a gentleness that somehow made it worse. "We'll keep her comfortable. She'll be in a safe facility where she can continue her recovery." Aria moved between them and her daughter's bed. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the mattress rail to stay standing. Her voice came out fractured, desperate, the voice of a woman watching her entire world collapse in real time. "Please. Please don't do this. She just had heart surgery. She needs me. I'm her mother. I'm all she has." Sophie opened her folder with a sharp snap. "According to the reports filed by concerned parties, you've been living in a vehicle with a feverish child for several weeks. You work multiple jobs that keep you away from her for 12, sometimes 14 hours a day. You left her alone at a shelter on multiple occasions. These are documented patterns of neglect." The lies were perfect. They were the kind of lies that sounded true because they contained fragments of truth. Yes, she had lived in a car. Yes, Ava had fever. Yes, she had worked long hours. But the context was missing. The desperation was missing. The love was missing. The reports didn't say that Aria worked 3 jobs because nobody would hire a homeless single mother, that she sat in her car during those hours counting her daughter's breaths, that she sold her blood twice a week to pay for Ava's medications, that she had walked away from a shelter only because they wouldn't let her stay after Marcus had her evicted. Jennifer Patterson extended her hands toward Ava. "We need to move her now, while she's still sedated. It will be easier for her." Aria's vision tunneled. The room contracted around her. Through the window behind her, she could see the parking lot where she had slept countless nights, the street where she had stood in line for shelter beds, the neighborhood that had swallowed her whole and asked for nothing in return except her absolute surrender. Her mind spiraled in a direction it hadn't gone in months, toward giving up. "Maybe they're right," a voice whispered. "Maybe I am unfit. I couldn't keep a roof over her head. I was sleeping in a car while she burned with fever. What kind of mother does that?" She thought of the photograph in her pocket, the one of Diego in his army uniform, his smile bright, his whole life ahead of him before the IED in Kandahar took him at 28. His last words before deployment, "Take care of our girl." "I failed," she thought. "I failed him. I failed her." Then Ava's fingers twitched. It was a small thing, barely perceptible, her daughter's hand moving in sleep, fingers curling as if searching for something, reaching for her mother even while unconscious, even while still under the weight of surgical anesthesia. The force shifted slightly. A single finger brushed against the metal of the bed rail. That small movement. That reflex that meant Ava was looking for her. Something hardened in Aria's chest. Not anger. Not rage. Something deeper and more dangerous. Clarity. She straightened. Wiped her eyes. Her voice was steady now, a voice that came from somewhere she didn't know existed inside herself. "No. You're not taking her." Marcus laughed. "You don't have a choice, girl. The law is on our side. You got nothing." Aria pulled out her phone. Her hands had stopped shaking. She scrolled to the contact Vincent had given her last night and pressed call. The phone rang twice. "Yes?" Vincent's voice came through, deep and calm. "They're here." CPS. Marcus and Sophie. They're trying to take Ava. Where are you? Children's Hospital. 7th floor. Surgery recovery. The line went dead. 20 seconds later, the door to Ava's hospital room opened. Vinny and Nino entered first, 2 men in charcoal suits, their shoulders wide enough to make the doorway seem small. They moved without hurrying, without noise, their faces carved from granite. Behind them walked Vincent Moreno in a suit that cost more than everything Marcus Webb owned, his dark eyes moving from face to face in the room with the intensity of a general surveying a battlefield. The temperature in the room dropped. Marcus's face went pale. Sophie's smirk flickered like a candle in wind. The 2 CPS workers exchanged a glance, suddenly aware that they had walked into something far larger than a custody matter. Vincent's voice was quiet, which somehow made it more terrifying than if he had shouted. Mr. Webb. Ms. Langford. I have been looking forward to meeting you. He extended a folder to Jennifer Patterson. Everything you need to know about them is in here. She opened it with shaking hands. Bank records flashed across her vision, wire transfers between Marcus Webb and Sophie Langford, thousands of dollars moving back and forth in patterns that spelled conspiracy. Testimonies followed, statement after statement from women who had lived through what Aria had lived through. Documented threats. Fabricated reports. A systematic scheme stretching back for years, affecting 47 women, all of them vulnerable, all of them desperate, all of them exactly like Aria. The male CPS worker read silently, his tired eyes growing wider. When he finished, he looked at Marcus and Sophie with a different expression entirely, not apology now, but disgust. You need to leave. Both of you. Now. But Vincent raised his hand, a small gesture, and the door opened again. This time federal agents entered, their suits navy blue, their badges visible, their expressions grim. The lead agent, a woman named Jackson with steel in her voice, stepped forward with handcuffs already in her hands. Marcus Webb, she said, you're under arrest for housing fraud, extortion, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and racketeering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Marcus tried to back away, tried to run, but Vinny and Nino were already moving, and he collapsed like a building with its foundation removed. His legs simply gave out. Agents caught him, held him up while they cuffed his wrists. His face blotched with tears. His breath came in panicked gasps like a cornered animal realizing there was no escape. Please, he begged, his voice breaking into pieces. Please, I can explain. This is a misunderstanding. I have money. I can pay. Agent Jackson turned to Sophie. Sophie Langford, you're under arrest for filing false reports to Child Protective Services, conspiracy to commit fraud, human trafficking, and extortion. Sophie's scream cut through the hospital room like a blade wrapped in ice. Do you know who I am? Do you know my board positions? My charities? My lawyers will destroy you. This is outrageous. This is a mistake. They dragged her out fighting, her expensive suit rumpling, her frosted hair falling in her face, mascara running in black streaks down her cheeks. Marcus followed, unable to walk, sobbing, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly as if his mind had not yet caught up to what was happening. The hospital room door closed. The silence that followed was absolute. Vincent turned to Aria. His eyes, dark as storm clouds, held something she had never seen directed at her before. Respect. Recognition. Too quick, he said quietly. Too easy. Too merciful, if I had simply had them disappear. But you deserve to see them face real justice. The kind that leaves a record. The kind that can't be explained away. He walked to Ava's bedside. Looked at her daughter sleeping, untouched, safe. His men watched from the doorway. Aria saw something move in Vincent's face, something that suggested he was remembering a child of his own, a loss he carried like stones in his pockets. She'll have everything she needs, he said. The best recovery care. The best doctors. And you, or he turned back to Aria, you will never be invisible again. 3 days later, the news broke. FBI raids at dawn on Marcus Webb's properties throughout North Philadelphia. Federal agents photographing documents, seizing computers, discovering the architecture of his cruelty laid bare in spreadsheets and bank records and recorded phone calls. 47 women. For years. Millions in stolen money. Marcus Webb, arrested in his underwear, led out of his townhouse in handcuffs, his mugshot broadcast on every local news station, unshaven, terrified, the look of a man understanding that the world no longer belonged to him. Federal prosecutors charged him with racketeering, extortion, conspiracy, housing fraud. 40 years minimum. His real estate empire collapsed in days. Properties seized. Bank accounts frozen. His name becoming synonymous with predation. Sophie Langford arrested publicly outside her Rittenhouse Square townhouse, news cameras catching the whole thing, FBI agents in vests, handcuffs snapping closed, her screaming that there was a mistake, that her lawyers would handle this, that this couldn't possibly be happening to her. 35 years on the charges. Her charity board positions revoked within hours. Her social standing, that delicate architecture of privilege, demolished completely. Both villains got their own cell at the federal detention center. Each faced the same reality: the world would remember what they had done. Sometimes the people who seem invisible carry the greatest light. 6 months after the FBI raids, the snow fell over Philadelphia in thick, silent sheets. Aria Vasquez stood on the porch of a small brick house in Fishtown, coffee warming her hands, watching Ava run circles in the backyard. The scar on her daughter's chest had faded to pale pink. The fever had broken 3 weeks after surgery. The girl who had been dying was now alive, running through snow like she had always been meant to. The key in Aria's pocket had its own weight. Not borrowed. Not temporary. Hers. Vincent's company had sold her the house at cost, and her salary at the community center, $2,000 a month, made the payments possible. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer desperate. She was standing. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and new paint. 2 bedrooms. A kitchen where she had made eggs for breakfast that morning. Ava had eaten all of them without coughing. Without pain. The small miracles of ordinary life. But Vincent had kept his distance for 6 months. She understood why. The debt was paid. The surgery was done. Their paths had crossed in emergency and crisis, and now that the emergency had passed, he had retreated to whatever world men like him inhabited. She did not expect to see him again. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday in a cream envelope with his name on it. Marcelo's Restaurant. 7 o'clock. Tonight. No explanation. No signature. Just the address of the place where everything had started, where she had saved a child and changed the direction of her own life without knowing it. Aria dressed carefully in a navy dress that hung straight and clean, borrowed from the donation closet at the community center. She had gained weight in 6 months, real weight, not desperation. Her body had learned how to be safe again. She left Ava with Mrs. Chen, the neighbor, a woman who brought soup and never asked for payment. Marcelo's was warm with candlelight. The same corner booth. The same table. Vincent sat alone, no guards flanking the walls, no men in suits positioned at the door. Just him. 47 years old. The scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone like a blade through stone. Wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than everything in her house combined. And his hands were shaking slightly as he stood to greet her. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was rough, like someone who had not spoken in days. Saturday. The space between them across the table felt like a distance that could not be crossed. A waiter brought water without being asked. Neither of them touched it. "I've been watching you from a distance," Vincent said. "I needed to know you were safe. That Ava was healing. That you didn't feel trapped." "I'm not," Aria said. Her voice steadied with the words. I'm the opposite of trapped. I have a job. I have a home. I have my daughter. I know. Then why did you ask me here? Vincent leaned back. He studied her with an intensity that made her skin feel thin. Because 6 months ago, I told myself I was doing this for you. Paying a debt. Helping a woman in crisis. But the truth is... He stopped. Started again. I haven't stopped thinking about you. The way you didn't hesitate that night. The way you fought for Ava even when you had nothing. You're the strongest person I have ever met. Aria's walls rose. The careful architecture she had built to protect herself. I'm not looking for a benefactor. I'm not offering that, Vincent said. I'm asking if maybe, now that you're on your feet, now that you're standing as my equal, if maybe you'd let me take you to dinner. Not as a debt. As a man who admires you. The conversation unfolded slowly. Aria told him about Diego, her husband, the car accident 8 years ago that had taken everything from her. About the years sleeping in her Honda, the shelter, the impossible choice between feeding her daughter and saving for surgery. She told him about the shame of invisibility, how it erodes you from the inside like rust. Vincent listened with the stillness of someone accustomed to carrying secrets. Then he told her about his daughter who never was. A pregnancy that ended at 7 months. A wife who blamed him for the danger his world carried, the way violence followed him like a shadow. A stillborn daughter in a hospital room, and the guilt that had lived in his chest for 14 years like a blade wrapped in ice. When I saw Sophia choking, he said, and then I saw you or a woman who had nothing but still moved without hesitation to save a child, it was like the universe was telling me that hope existed. That redemption existed. That maybe I could feel something other than loss. Aria reached across the table. She did not touch his hand. She simply moved it closer, a gesture of possibility. I don't know what this is, she said. Neither do I, Vincent answered. But I know what it isn't. It isn't gratitude. It isn't obligation. It's just... He paused. It's the first time in 14 years I've felt like I could breathe. They stayed at Marcello's until nearly 11. The waiter cleared their plates. Fresh wine appeared without order. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the streets in white, erasing the borders between neighborhoods, between her world and his. Between past and future. At the end of the night, Vincent walked her to her car. The February wind cut across the parking lot like a blade wrapped in ice. His breath clouded in the cold. Next week, he asked. Next week, Aria confirmed. He did not kiss her. He simply watched her drive away, and in that moment he looked like what he actually was, not a man who controlled empires, not a man who commanded loyalty through fear, but simply a man who had been alone in the dark for so long that the sight of another person's light had shattered something inside him that he thought was beyond repair. At the same hour, 9 blocks away, Vinnie Moreno sat in a car outside a strip club in Kensington. He watched Vincent pull out of Marcello's parking lot, alone, and his jaw tightened. 20 years he had worked for Vincent. 20 years of loyalty, of blood spilled in service of the organization. And now Vincent was running to a woman. A nobody. A shelter worker who had stumbled into their world by accident. Vinnie lit a cigarette and made a phone call. The conversation lasted 40 seconds. By the time it ended, 3 men understood that the situation needed to be managed. That Vincent's weakness needed to be addressed. That this woman was a liability. But for tonight, for this moment, Aria drove home through the snow feeling something she had not felt since Diego died. Hope. The fragile, terrifying sensation of believing that the future could be different. That she could be loved not for what she had lost, but for who she had become. 9 months later, the cherry blossoms bloomed early that spring. Ava played in the backyard of the Fishtown house, completely healed, her laughing voice carrying across the fence to the neighbors. She was 7 years old and beautiful and alive. She did not remember the hospital. She did not remember the fear. She only knew that her mother had fought for her and won. Vincent arrived on a Saturday morning in a regular sedan, the first time Aria had seen him arrive in anything other than a black SUV with men in suits. He carried bagels and orange juice. He looked like any other man, and in some fundamental way, he had become one. They sat on the porch, watching Ava play. The coffee was still warm between them. "I never thought I'd have this," Vincent said. "Peace." "Neither did I," Aria answered. The contrast was written in the space between then and now. 1 year ago, Aria sleeping in a 2003 Honda Civic with $2 in her pocket and a daughter running a fever. Marcus Webb arrested, his face unshaven on every news station, facing 40 years in federal prison for racketeering and extortion. Sophie Langford in her own cell, her charity board positions revoked, her social standing demolished. Federal crimes. Public humiliation. Justice served not through violence but through exposure. At the community center where Aria worked, she ran a support group every Thursday. Women in crisis. Women with nothing. Women who thought they were invisible. She sat beside them and said the words she had needed to hear: "I have been exactly where you are. Let me help." One young woman named Maria told her story: lost job, eviction notice, 3 children and no options. Aria handed her information about housing assistance programs that Vincent's legitimate businesses funded. Job training. Medical care. The resources that had been invisible to her when she was drowning. "How do you know about all this?" Maria asked. "Because someone helped me," Aria said. "Now I help others." The camera pulled back to show the room full of women sitting in circles, learning that invisible did not mean worthless. That circumstances did not define worth. That one person's courage could become another person's pathway. In the final months, Aria's life had reorganized itself into something unrecognizable from what came before. Not a fantasy. Not a rescue by a powerful man. A real, difficult, ordinary life built on her own work and Vincent's love. He was not her savior. He was her equal. Finally, the man she had saved turned into the man who stood beside her, not above her. The small wooden photo frame sat on the shelf in the hallway. Diego in his Navy uniform, smiling, alive in the way that only photographs of the dead can be. Aria looked at it sometimes, not with pain anymore, but with gratitude. He had loved her. She had loved him. And that love had produced Ava, whose life was now a gift she could give fully. Sometimes the people who seem invisible carry the greatest light. You just have to give them a chance to shine. Aria had been that person. And now she was giving others the same chance she had been given, not charity, but dignity. Not rescue, but resurrection. The knowledge that being seen was possible. That being loved was possible. That the future could be written in something other than desperation. This story teaches us that even in the darkest moments, love finds a way. If you believe that, hit like and subscribe. Leave a comment and tell us how this story made you feel. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.